When he called me too old for adventure, something inside me didn't break, it simply went quiet, the way a flame dims when a window slams shut. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand to be seen. I just walked away and folded the words into that small drawer in my heart where I kept all the things he had said over the years. Things that hurt, things that dismissed me, things that chipped away at the woman I once was. And I might have left them there forever, might have continued believing him the way a person starts believing a lie told often enough, if I hadn't watched him drag his suitcase across our hallway that morning. It was the same suitcase we had taken to our honeymoon, the same one we took to visit our grandchildren, but this time it was filled with shirts ironed by someone else, packed with plans I wasn't part of, and zipped shut with the careless assurance of a man who no longer bothered to pretend. He told me he was going to Italy for business expansion, and his secretary, young breathy-voiced long-legged, was just joining for translation. But I saw the truth in the way he avoided my eyes, the way he kept checking his phone, the way he lied like he had rehearsed it in the mirror. That's when something inside me finally stopped believing and started acting. My name is Clarine. I've lived through 6 decades of storms and sunshine, raised children who grew into their own worlds, baked casseroles for neighbors going through heartbreak, spent Sundays volunteering at the small church down the street where the walls still smell faintly of incense and old hymn books. I've been called many things: mother, friend, neighbor, caregiver, but the title I poured my soul into the most was wife. And somewhere along the way, that title became less of a role and more of a cage. Before I go further, I want to ask something of you. Where are you watching from today? I know you're just a face behind a screen somewhere in this vast world, but imagining the towns, the warm kitchens, the soft couches where people like you sit and listen to my story, it makes me feel less like a ghost drifting in memories. It reminds me that someone somewhere is hearing me, maybe even understanding me better than he ever did. You see, when I married him, I thought I had unlocked a fairy tale. He was the kind of man who dazzled people without even trying. He laughed loudly, lived boldly, and carried an energy that filled every room. I was quieter, grounded, the one who made sure life stayed steady while he chased dreams. At first it felt like balance, his flame my soil. Together we built a life that looked picture-perfect from the outside. But time, that patient sculptor, slowly carves away illusions. It didn't take long for me to realize he loved admiration more than intimacy, applause more than affection. While I found joy in planting tulips in the spring, savoring slow breakfasts on Sundays, taking long scenic drives to visit our grandchildren, he fed on attention like it was oxygen he couldn't breathe without. First, it didn't matter. In our early years, his charm was exciting. His ambition was impressive. But little by little, admiration from strangers became more important to him than appreciation from me. He began staying out late, claiming networking events. He started dressing sharper when he left the house than when he stayed home. He lost interest in conversations that weren't about him, his achievements, his future. And I, quiet, adaptable me, let him. I let him because I wanted to keep the peace. I let him because I believed a marriage was about compromise. I let him because I didn't know the difference between love and habit. But growing older has a strange way of sharpening your eyesight, not literally but spiritually. You begin seeing through people, through excuses, through masks. You begin understanding that some people don't fall out of love, they simply run out of audience. And that's exactly what he did. He traded our decades of memories for a woman who laughed at all his jokes the way I used to when I was 25. He traded the home we built for filtered photos in front of Italian monuments. He traded me for attention. And when he finally left for Italy with her, walking out with the confidence of a man who assumed I would stay exactly where he left me, something in me woke up. Not bitterness. Not rage. Something better. Something stronger. Something long overdue. I decided that if he thought I was too old for adventure, then maybe it was time to prove just how wrong he really was. When the door clicked shut behind him, and the sound of his suitcase wheels faded down the driveway, I stood in the center of our living room, surrounded by decades of carefully built routines that suddenly felt like someone else's life. His slippers were still beside the couch. His coffee mug, half rinsed, sat on the drying rack. His favorite jacket hung on the hook by the stairs. Everything in the house was exactly where he left it, as if he owned the air, the silence, the beating heart of the home itself. But for the first time in 40 years, those objects didn't remind me of him. They reminded me of me, Of all the years I spent folding his shirts, adjusting his moods, softening his rough edges while letting mine harden, I sank into the armchair by the window and stared at the street, imagining the plane lifting off the ground with him in it, laughing with his secretary, probably bragging about his new freedom. And in that moment, instead of crying, a strange calm washed over me. A calm that whispered, "He may have left, but you are still here. And you have a life to reclaim." I didn't decide my next move out of spite. It wasn't revenge that stirred in my chest. It was something purer, something long neglected: self-respect. I realized that for years I had lived in the shadow of his ambitions, his ego, his appetite for being admired. I had planted tulips while he planted doubts. I had hosted dinners while he hosted women's attention. I had created a home, and he had turned it into a stage. And when an actor leaves the stage, the curtains don't fall, they rise. So I stood up, walked to the bedroom, and opened the closet, the one we shared, but where his clothes dominated like an overgrown forest choking out sunlight. I ran my fingers over the fabrics, the expensive suits, the shirts he insisted made him look younger, the colognes he bought after watching younger men wear them. And slowly, methodically, I began creating piles. Not of anger, of clarity. In the process, I found a dusty box on the top shelf, my travel journals from years ago, the ones I stopped writing in because he always said travel was too much hassle, too expensive, or something for younger people. I opened the first one, traced my handwriting, and felt my heartbeat shift. My dreams had been sitting in a box while I shrunk myself to fit his narrative. I realized then that adventure never left me. I had just been talked out of it. As I flipped through the pages, a note slipped out, one I had written to myself in my 30s. "Clarine, don't stop exploring. The world is big, and so is your spirit." I smiled, a sad smile, a proud smile, a rediscovered smile. And then something bold, something reckless, something wonderfully alive sparked inside me. If he can go to Italy, why can't I? Not to chase him. Never. But to chase myself. I went downstairs to the kitchen, made myself a fresh cup of tea, and for the first time in years, sat at the dining table without rushing, without serving, without waiting for someone else to arrive. I opened my laptop and typed, "Best solo travel destinations for women over 50. You'd be amazed how many results appeared. Thousands of stories from women like me who refused to shrink with age, who rediscovered themselves through landscapes, strangers, and courage. I felt a flutter in my stomach. Not fear, not anxiety, excitement. That flutter had been asleep for so long it felt foreign. Like discovering a forgotten room in your own house. I began reading, bookmarking, imagining. I didn't need fancy plans or permission, or someone to carry my suitcase. I needed a beginning. A single step toward the version of myself I had buried under years of compromise. After hours of reading, one destination kept appearing in article after article. Santorini. White cliffs, blue domes, sunlit skies, narrow alleys filled with stories. Something about it called to me like a whisper through a locked door. I clicked on images, and for a moment I forgot my age, my heartbreak, my circumstances. I saw myself standing on a balcony overlooking the Aegean Sea, wearing a flowing dress the wind kept trying to steal. I saw myself laughing, not the polite laugh I gave him at parties, but the real one I hadn't heard in decades. I saw myself free. That night I didn't sleep. Not from sadness but from awakening. The next morning I took a deep breath, opened the airline website, and booked a ticket. Not for him. Not for anyone. For me. A one-way ticket to redefine who Clarine was, beyond the title of wife, beyond the shadow of neglect, beyond the belief that life had expired for me. And as I clicked confirm purchase, a new chapter quietly unfolded inside my soul. One he would never be able to understand, because he had never bothered to know the woman he married in the first place. The morning of my departure arrived faster than I expected, yet slower than the version of me who had spent decades waiting for permission to live. I woke before sunrise, the house still wrapped in the kind of silence that used to comfort me but now felt like a reminder of all the years I had filled it alone. As I moved through the rooms, every corner whispered memories, some sweet, many heavy. The kitchen still held the ghost of every breakfast I cooked for him while he scrolled through his phone. The living room still echoed with the evenings I spent waiting for him to come home from work meetings that were never about work. The hallway still felt haunted by the woman I used to be, the one who tolerated being an afterthought. But today was different. Today the house no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a chapter gently closing. I made myself tea, the same blend I used to make for him, except for the first time in years, I made it the way I liked it, strong, fragrant, unapologetic. I sat at the table sipping slowly, savoring the moment as sunlight warmed the wooden floor. I didn't rush. I didn't worry. I didn't shrink. When I finished, I placed the empty cup in the sink and wiped the counter, not because I had to, but because I wanted to leave my home with the same grace I had carried inside it all these years. Then I went upstairs, opened my suitcase, and looked at the clothes I had carefully packed. Not the safe, dull outfits he preferred, the ones that made me blend into the background while he absorbed all the attention. Instead, I packed bold colors, flowing dresses, comfortable shoes, clothes that made me feel alive rather than appropriate. I slipped into a white dress with light blue embroidery, tied my hair back loosely, and studied my reflection. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not because she looked older, but because she looked free. There was a softness in her eyes, but also a spark, the kind that comes from stepping into the unknown with courage rather than fear. I picked up my passport, my ticket, my journal, and the small pendant necklace my daughter had given me years ago. I wore it today like armor. As I locked the front door behind me, I expected sadness to tug at my heart, perhaps a sense of guilt or loss. But instead, I felt something steady and empowering rise within me, like reclaiming your name after someone mispronounces it for years. The taxi arrived, and as I sat in the back seat watching my neighborhood fade in the rearview mirror, I realized something extraordinary. I wasn't running away. I was walking toward myself. The airport was loud, bustling, alive, a perfect contrast to the quiet life I had lived. People rushed past me with their suitcases, hugging loved ones, calling out children's names, dragging backpacks. I wandered through the terminal, taking in the smells of coffee shops, the flicker of departure screens, the soft announcements echoing from the speakers. I felt small in the crowd but not invisible. For once, being alone didn't feel like loneliness, it felt like possibility. When I reached my gate, I sat near the window watching the planes ascend into the sky one after another, taking people toward new beginnings, reunions, endings, dreams. And it hit me, I was one of them now. A woman who had traded predictability for courage. A woman who refused to let age define her horizon. As I waited, an elderly couple sat beside me, holding hands tightly, whispering to each other in soft, excited tones. They looked at me and smiled, and I smiled back, an honest, open smile. "You traveling alone?" the woman asked kindly. "Yes," I replied. "For the first time in a long, long time." She nodded gently, her eyes full of warmth. "Good," she said. "Sometimes the best journeys are the ones we take with ourselves." Her words settled into my heart like a blessing. When the announcement finally came, now boarding for Santorini, my pulse quickened. I stood, straightened my dress, held my suitcase handle firmly, and walked toward the gate. Every step felt like a quiet rebellion against the years I spent waiting for him to choose me. Every breath felt like an exhale of all the suppressed dreams I had folded into that dusty journal. And as I stepped onto the plane, sliding into my seat by the window, watching the world shrink as we lifted off the ground, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades: joy. Pure, unfiltered joy. The kind that doesn't apologize, doesn't hesitate, doesn't fear being too bold. And as the clouds wrapped around the airplane and the ocean glimmered below like a promise, I whispered to myself, "This is your story now, Clarine. And it's just beginning." When the plane touched down in Santorini and the doors opened, a warm Mediterranean breeze flowed in, carrying the scent of saltwater, sun-baked stone, and something I hadn't felt in years: possibility. I stepped out into the brilliant Greek sunlight, and for a moment I simply stood there, letting the warmth rest on my skin like a gentle welcome. The airport was small but lively, filled with the rhythm of suitcase wheels, excited chatter, and taxi engines revving outside. Everything around me felt unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting, as if the universe had been saving this place for me all along. My taxi ride from the airport wove through narrow roads carved into hillsides, bordered by blooming bougainvillea and whitewashed houses that glowed under the sun. I watched the world pass by through the window, mesmerized by the contrast of deep blue sea and white cliffs, each view more stunning than the last. And with every mile I felt a layer of heaviness peel away, like shedding an old skin I didn't need anymore. When the taxi finally stopped in front of my small cliffside hotel, I stepped out and stared in awe. The building was simple, painted in bright white with curved edges, blue shutters, and steps leading down to a terrace overlooking the sea. Waves shimmered like glass under the afternoon light. The receptionist, a cheerful woman named Talia, welcomed me with a kindness that felt almost healing. "First time in Santorini?" she asked, handing me a chilled glass of lemon water. "First time traveling alone," I corrected, and she gave me a look that mixed admiration with understanding. "Then this island will take care of you," she said softly. I checked into a room with a small balcony that overlooked the endless expanse of the Aegean Sea. The moment I stepped outside, the view nearly took my breath away. Turquoise water stretching out to the horizon, the cliffs dotted with white houses, the sun painting gold across the waves. I rested my hands on the cool stone railing and felt a calm settle into me. A calm I hadn't known in decades. I spent the first hour simply breathing, letting the breeze touch my face, listening to the distant call of seabirds, watching tiny boats glide across the water. For the first time in so long, I wasn't thinking about him. I wasn't thinking about his lies, his betrayal, his absence. I was thinking about me. When the sun began to dip toward the horizon, I decided to explore the nearby village. The cobblestone paths wound between shops selling handmade jewelry, local art, and ceramics painted in shades of blue and white. Couples strolled hand in hand, tourists snapped photos, and laughter floated through the air like music. I wandered slowly, taking in every sound, every smell, every color. A small cafe caught my eye. A cozy place with wooden chairs, colorful cushions, and a chalkboard sign that read, "Try our pistachio baklava." I walked in and ordered a slice along with a cup of Greek coffee. As I sat by the window savoring the sweet, flaky dessert, I realized something profound. I wasn't lonely. I was alone, yes, but not lonely. There's a difference, one I had forgotten over the years spent living beside a man who made me feel more invisible than solitude ever could. A group of older women sat at the table beside me, chatting animatedly in Greek. One of them noticed me smiling in their direction and leaned over to say in accented English, "You travel by yourself?" "Yes," I answered, and her eyes lit up. "Good," she said, placing a gentle hand on my arm. "Women your age forget they still have life. You did not forget." Her words struck me like a blessing disguised as casual conversation. After finishing my coffee, I walked to the edge of the village, where a viewpoint overlooked the caldera. The sun had nearly set, casting radiant colors, orange, pink, lavender across the sky. The sea mirrored the hues like liquid sunset. I stood among strangers, all watching the same breathtaking sight, yet I felt as if the moment belonged uniquely to me. As the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, applause broke out, a tradition among visitors. I found myself clapping too, laughing softly. Not at the sunset, but at the fact that I had finally given myself a moment like this. This was what adventure felt like. Not wild danger, not youth-driven recklessness, but discovering joy at your own pace, in your own time. Walking back to my hotel through lantern-lit paths, I felt lighter, steadier, more myself than I had in years. And as I unlocked my room and stepped onto the balcony once more, the night breeze wrapped around me like a quiet promise. I wasn't here to forget him. I was here to remember me. The next morning, I woke to the soft glow of sunlight filtering through the sheer white curtains, accompanied by the distant rhythmic crash of waves against the cliffs. For a moment I lay still, wrapped in the quiet luxury of not having to rush anywhere. Not to cook breakfast before his meetings, not to tidy the house, not to anticipate his moods or tiptoe around his vanity. The peace felt almost foreign, like a guest I hadn't hosted in years, yet it curled around me warmly. After a slow morning stretch, I dressed in a flowing linen outfit I had bought the day before. A soft sea green color that made me feel lighter somehow. I headed to the terrace dining area where a simple breakfast buffet was laid out. Fresh fruit glistened like jewels, golden pastries released warm buttery aromas, and pitchers of cold juice waited beside steaming kettles of tea. I filled my plate and sat near the edge of the terrace overlooking the sparkling sea. The view was so beautiful it almost felt unreal, as though the horizon itself had been painted just for me. While sipping my tea, I overheard a group of women at a nearby table, tourists from Canada, laughing over their travel mishaps. They talked about getting lost in the narrow alleys, buying the wrong ferry tickets, and accidentally ordering squid thinking it was chicken. Their laughter was infectious, carrying a kind of joy that reminded me of the friendships I had long neglected back home, the brunches I skipped, the calls I shortened because he didn't like when I wasted time gossiping. A moment later, one of the women caught my eye and smiled warmly. "Traveling alone?" she asked. "Yes," I answered with confidence this time instead of hesitation. "Good for you," she said. "It's brave." Brave. No one had used that word for me in years. Not when I held our family together, not when I managed crises, not when I survived heartbreak after heartbreak. But here I was, being seen by strangers in a way I was never seen by the man who shared my home. After breakfast, I decided to wander into the heart of Oia. The cobblestone streets stretched like veins through the village, leading me through small shops filled with handcrafted ceramics, jewelry made of volcanic stones, and watercolor paintings of sunsets that looked almost too beautiful to be real. I bought a small pendant carved with a symbol of renewal, a phoenix rising from the ashes. The shopkeeper, a kind elderly man with silver hair and gentle wrinkles, wrapped it carefully and said, "For new beginnings." Something in me softened. Yes, that was exactly what this trip was, a quiet rebirth. As the day grew warmer, I joined a small walking tour led by a local woman named Eleni. She guided our group through the history of the island, the volcanic eruption that shaped its iconic cliffs, and the traditions preserved by generations. At one point, she led us to a small, almost hidden chapel perched on the edge of a cliff. Its blue dome contrasted sharply with the white walls and the endless sea behind it. When we stepped inside, the cool, dim interior felt sacred, the air heavy with the scent of old candles and quiet prayers. I sat on one of the wooden benches and closed my eyes. I didn't pray for him to change or for him to return, or for some miracle to restore what was already broken beyond repair. Instead, I prayed for strength, for peace, for the courage to continue choosing myself. When I opened my eyes, I felt lighter, as if I had left something heavy behind, some old version of myself I no longer needed. After the tour ended, I walked back through the village, stopping by a small seaside cafe for lunch. As I waited for my meal, I looked around at the other patrons, couples holding hands, families laughing, solo travelers like me taking pictures or journaling. And then, unexpectedly, tears filled my eyes, not from sadness, but from something bittersweet and tender. I realized that while he had been traveling with his secretary, pretending to rediscover youth, I had come here and rediscovered myself. Later that afternoon, I returned to my hotel and spent time on my balcony, writing in my journal. Words poured out of me like water breaking through a dam. Memories, regrets, hopes, fears, dreams I thought I had forgotten. I wrote about the girl I once was, the woman I had become, and the stranger I refused to remain. As evening approached, I dressed for dinner and walked down the steps toward a cliffside restaurant. Lanterns glowed along the terraces, casting soft golden light across the path. The sky was painted in rich shades of pink and orange, the kind that made you stop mid-step just to breathe it all in. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, each moment, each breath. And when the last light of day faded into the soft embrace of night, I leaned back in my chair and whispered to myself, "You're doing it, Clarine. You're really doing it." I wasn't just traveling. I was transforming. The next day began with a strange mix of restlessness and confidence, the kind that only comes when you finally understand that your life belongs entirely to you. I stepped out onto my balcony and breathed in the crisp morning air, light, salty, full of promise. Down below, the blue rooftops and whitewashed walls of Oa glowed under the early sun like a village carved from cloud and light. I decided I wanted to see more. More island, more sky. More pieces of myself reflected in unfamiliar places. So I joined a small sailing excursion recommended by the hotel staff. By mid-morning, I was boarding a catamaran with a dozen strangers. A young honeymoon couple who couldn't keep their hands off each other. A family with two energetic teenagers. An older man with a camera strapped to his chest. And a solo woman traveler from Brazil who introduced herself as Livia. She had the kind of warm smile that instantly made you feel like old friends. The boat set off, slicing through the water with a soft hum, the island shrinking behind us as the sea opened up into a vast, shimmering world. The wind played with my hair, and for the first time in a long while I didn't worry about how I looked. I simply existed, present and alive. We sailed toward the volcanic hot springs, passing cliffs layered with thousands of years of history, colors shifting from deep rust to chalky white to obsidian black. Livia stood beside me at the railing and said, You look at the world like someone who's seeing it again for the first time. I laughed softly, touched by the truth of her observation. Maybe I am. When we anchored near the springs, the guide announced that anyone willing could swim in the warm, mineral-rich waters. The younger passengers jumped in immediately, splashing and shouting, but I hesitated. I couldn't remember the last time I had gone swimming, maybe 20 years ago, before he began criticizing how I looked in swimsuits, before I started hiding my body like a secret. I stood at the edge of the boat, heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with the water below. Livia noticed my uncertainty and said gently, "You don't have to be fearless. Just curious." Her words settled in me, soft but powerful. So I climbed down the ladder and let the warm, rusty water embrace me. It felt like slipping into a second skin, one that didn't judge or demand or compare. As I floated staring up at the endless blue sky, I felt decades of self-consciousness wash away, layer by layer, like peeling off armor that never truly protected me. When I climbed back onto the boat, I felt lighter, braver, almost reborn. After lunch on board, a feast of grilled fish, salads, and fresh bread, we anchored near a secluded beach with pebbles as smooth as polished stones. I walked along the shore, feeling the stones press into my feet with a comforting firmness. Somewhere between the sound of the waves and the warmth of the sun, memories of my past life drifted through my mind, not to haunt me, but to remind me of how far I had come. I thought of the arguments we never resolved, the apologies I never received, the way he looked at me like a piece of furniture he had outgrown. And then I surprised myself by realizing I felt nothing. Not anger, not longing, not grief, just freedom. The boat ride back to it was calm, the sea turning a deep shade of sapphire as the sun began its descent. Livia and I talked for hours about our lives, our mistakes, our rediscoveries. She spoke about leaving a marriage that suffocated her just like mine had, and how she had promised herself she would live boldly, even if it scared her. "We women," she said, tapping her chest, "we are taught to shrink. But look at you, you're expanding." Her words touched something raw and tender inside me. When the boat finally docked and we stepped back onto solid ground, I felt taller, steadier, more rooted in myself. I thanked Livia for her companionship, exchanged contact information, and promised to meet her for dinner later in the week. Back in my room, I showered and changed into a soft cotton dress before stepping onto the balcony once more. The sky was a blaze of color, rose, copper, gold, reflecting off the rippling sea like molten light. I rested my hands on the railing, closed my eyes, and whispered softly, "You're living, Clarine. Really living." And for the first time I believed it, not because someone told me, not because I needed validation, but because I could feel it in every breath, every heartbeat, every quiet thrill running through my veins. I wasn't the woman he left behind. I was the woman who rose when he walked away. The next morning felt different. Not softer, not gentler, but clearer. As if someone had wiped the dust off the windows of my mind. I woke up before dawn, the sky still a deep indigo, and brewed myself a cup of Greek coffee that filled the room with its rich, earthy aroma. I carried it out to the balcony and watched the first slivers of sunlight stretch across the horizon. It amazed me how quickly a place could begin to feel like a sanctuary, when your soul finally had room to breathe. I sat there for nearly an hour, listening to the distant hum of fishermen starting their day. And for the first time in years, I wasn't rushing to meet anyone else's expectations. Later that morning, I decided to explore the village on foot. The narrow paths twisted between whitewashed homes, domed churches, and small shops that smelled of fresh bread and citrus. Children ran past me laughing. Elderly women swept their doorsteps while humming old island songs, and everywhere I looked, the world seemed to exist without hurry. I wandered aimlessly, letting the village guide me rather than a map, until I reached a small art gallery tucked between a bakery and a cafe. Something about the place pulled me in. Inside, soft classical music played, and the walls were lined with paintings of Santorini. Sunsets, cliffside homes, rippling water, and faces full of stories. The gallery owner, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a kind smile, approached me. "You look like someone searching for something," he said gently. His voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime reading people through their eyes. I laughed softly. "Aren't we all?" He nodded knowingly and led me to a painting near the back. It showed a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, wind blowing through her hair, her dress billowing like a sail ready to take flight. Her face wasn't visible, but her posture, strong, upright, unbroken, spoke louder than any expression. "She's discovering her own strength," he explained. "Sometimes we forget we've had wings all along." I felt a lump form in my throat because it was true. I had forgotten. Or rather, I had been taught to forget. Taught to put others first, taught to make myself smaller. Taught that my dreams were less important than stability. I thanked him quietly and left the gallery, carrying the weight of his words like a lantern inside me. As I walked outside, I spotted a small cafe overlooking the caldera and decided to stop for lunch. The waiter seated me by the railing, where the panoramic view stretched endlessly. Cliffs cascading into the sea, sailboats drifting like tiny white petals, the sun gleaming off the water like molten gold. While waiting for my meal, I noticed a couple at the table beside me having an argument. The woman's eyes glistened with frustration while the man dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand. The scene felt painfully familiar, like a mirror reflecting an older version of me. Once upon a time, I too had sat across tables just like this, shrinking into silence while he decided which of my feelings were valid. I looked away, not out of discomfort, but out of gratitude. Gratitude that I had walked out of that life before it consumed the last pieces of me. After lunch, I made my way back to the hotel to rest. But the universe had other plans. When I entered the lobby, I heard someone call my name. It was Livia, waving excitedly, her sun hat slightly crooked. "Clarine, I was hoping I'd run into you again," she said. She invited me to join a group of travelers she had met, 2 women from Ireland, a retired teacher from Australia, and a divorced businessman from Montreal, all around my age. They welcomed me with an ease I wasn't used to. No one asked intrusive questions, no one judged my story, no one expected me to shrink. We spent the afternoon wandering through markets, tasting local cheeses and honey, sharing stories that made us laugh until tears formed. For the first time in years, I felt socially alive, present, valued, seen not as someone's wife or someone's burden, but as a whole person with a whole identity. As the sun began to sink, the sky painted itself in shades of lavender and fire. We all sat on the steps overlooking the caldera. Someone opened a bottle of wine. Someone else played soft music from their phone. In that golden hour, surrounded by strangers who felt like friends, I realized something profound. Healing doesn't always happen in grand moments. Sometimes it happens in small, ordinary interactions, a shared joke, a spontaneous adventure, a stranger's unexpected kindness. I leaned back, letting the sunset wash over me, and whispered to myself, "You're still changing, still unfolding." And in that moment I felt it again. That quiet, powerful certainty that my life hadn't ended when he walked away. It had finally begun. That night, long after the sky turned dark and the village lights began shimmering like scattered stars, I returned to my hotel room with a peaceful exhaustion that felt almost sacred. I opened the balcony doors and let the cool sea breeze drift in, carrying with it the faint scent of jasmine and salt. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the day replay in my mind, the laughter, the conversations, the unexpected connections that had stitched themselves into the quiet places of my heart. For the first time in so many years, the silence in the room didn't feel lonely. It felt like a companion. I took out my notebook, the one I had packed at the last minute, and began writing. Not about him, not about the betrayal or the heartbreak, but about myself. My dreams. My fears. My rediscovered courage. And somewhere between the lines I realized something profound. All along I had been waiting for someone to save me, but the truth was, I had been saving myself little by little the moment I chose to walk away. The next morning, I woke with a renewed sense of purpose. I didn't plan the day. Instead, I let it unfold on its own. I took a boat tour with the group I had met, Livia, the Irish sisters, the Australian teacher, and the Canadian businessman. Together we sailed across the Aegean Sea, the water shimmering beneath us like sheets of blue glass. The wind tangled through my hair, and for the first time in decades I felt light, unburdened, untouched by the weight of expectations. We anchored by a small volcanic island, where everyone went swimming. I hesitated at first, old insecurities rising in my chest. "You're too old for this, you don't look like you used to, people will stare." The same poison phrases he had repeated so many times they had become internal echoes. But just as those thoughts began to tighten around me, Livia splashed water in my direction and yelled, "Come on, Clarine. Life doesn't wait." And something inside me snapped, not in anger but in awakening. I stepped off the boat and into the water. It wrapped around me like a cool embrace, and as I floated on my back staring at the endless sky, I realized that this exact moment was the first time in years I was living purely for myself. No roles, no obligations, no bending to fit someone else's mold. Just me, a woman reclaiming her own story. We laughed, swam, shared secrets, and by the time we returned to the harbor, my cheeks hurt from smiling. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt such uncomplicated joy. Back at the hotel that evening, I received a message from my daughter. Short, cold, practical. "We heard you're traveling. Dad is upset. You should come home and fix this." I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling the old guilt try to claw its way back in. For decades I had been the family's fixer, the peacemaker, the emotional glue that held everything together. But what had any of it given me? Silence. Invisibility. Dismissal. I took a deep breath and typed a reply. Not angry, not bitter, but firm in a way I had never allowed myself to be. "I am not coming home to fix what I didn't break. I am taking time for myself now. I hope one day you'll understand." When I hit send, a new kind of freedom rushed through me, stronger than anything the island breeze could offer. Later that night, as I sat on the balcony sipping chamomile tea, the village beneath me glowing softly with lanterns and laughter, I felt something shift inside me. A closing of one chapter and the opening of another. I realized I had spent too long believing my worth was tied to a marriage, to being needed, to staying quiet. But here, thousands of miles away from the life that had caged me, I finally saw myself clearly. I wasn't too old. I wasn't forgotten. I wasn't done living. I was beginning again. The next morning I booked another week on the island. Not out of escape but out of choice. I wasn't running anymore, I was building, rebuilding, becoming. And as I watched the sunrise spread gold across the sea, I whispered a promise to myself, one I intended to keep for the rest of my life. Never again will I let someone else decide the size of my world. And with that, my story truly began, not as his wife, not as someone's burden, but as Clarine, a woman rediscovering her own adventure.